This is a video in which I'm going to talk through referencing, the kind of referencing that we use in early childhood studies. And obviously referencing is a really important part of any assignment. So what I'm going to do in this particular video is talk about why we need to use referencing, what's plagiarism, it's a very important term that we need to be very familiar with, how you reference in the text of your work, how you use a direct quotation, a little bit about indirect or cited in references, and then how you go about compiling a reference section. So why do we need to use references? Well, clearly the most important reason is because readers need to be able to locate the source of your ideas. If you don't do this, this is clearly regarded as plagiarism within the university and beyond. So when we're talking about plagiarism, basically what we're saying is passing off somebody else's ideas as if they're your own. So if you're talking about a particular theory, say you're talking about the zone of proximal development, you didn't make that up. It was Vygotsky's idea, so there needs to be the reference there to locate the source of that idea. So it's the idea, not just necessarily a direct quote, that needs to have the reference. Plagiarism means more than that as well. Of course, plagiarism also means passing off somebody else's work, a student's work, so it's not just about published work. But I'm not going to talk about that so much today in this video, because in this video I really want to concentrate on referencing itself. We also need to use references because it shows who and what's influenced your thinking, the kind of ideas that have made you write in the way that you've written, the kind of argument that you're putting forward. And it also indicates to the marking tutor the amount of reading you've done. So that's quite an important thing too, because generally people who've read widely are the people that are getting the better marks. And it also enables people to follow up on any reading. I quite often see something and I think, oh, that sounds really interesting in the text of a piece of work. Perhaps I've read a book or something. And within the text of it, I think, that idea sounds really good. I want to read that original work myself. And I'll go to the back of the book, look at the reference section, and I've got the full reference there so I can follow it up and actually read that original source for myself. So it's actually really good for that too. Now I'm going to talk a little bit here about how you reference in the text of your work. And generally there's two main ways. So this first way here, let's just go back one. This first way here, you can see that the authors of the particular book appear at the beginning of the sentence. So we've got Burns and Sinfield, the date in brackets, argue that it's important to find a comfortable place to study. But there's another way you can do it. You can flip it round the other way and have the names of the authors and the date at the end of the sentence. So here you would write, a comfortable place to study is considered to be very important. And then you've got the reference there. Either way is fine, and you don't have to stick to one way in your writing. You might want to mix it up, just like published authors do. But one thing you do need to be aware of is how the brackets work. And the way to think about the brackets are the information that needs to be there, but the bit you don't say. So when you're proofreading your work, think about it this way. Burns and Sinfield argue that it's important to find a comfortable place to study. That makes human sense. In the second example that I had there, you'll notice that the bracket goes round Burns and Sinfield and the date. This and this looks differently. Just imagine if I had only bracketed round 2012 here. It would read, a comfortable place to study is considered to be very important, Burns and Sinfield. It just doesn't make sense. That's why when you put the reference at the end, you need to bracket that additional bit, those author names too. Okay, so when you proofread, think about it that way. Think about your brackets working for you to give that information that's needed, but that you wouldn't say if you were reading it out loud. Now, when you reference in the text, you also need a corresponding and full reference in the end of your work. So you'll have a reference section, which I will talk about a little bit later. So again, we've got that same bit of writing, Burns and Sinfield and the comfortable place to study. And in the final reference section, you would need to have the full reference there. So this bit at the bottom here. You don't do that in the text of the essay because it would be a bit cumbersome, wouldn't it? It would take up a lot of words. It's a bit cumbersome. So that's why in the text of your essay, you just have the author's names and the date in this example. But you need to have it in full in your final reference section. Sometimes you're going to want to use a direct quotation. And when we say a direct quotation, we're talking about word for word what an author has said. On my previous slides, I was showing you me putting into my own words the ideas of some authors. What I'm talking about now is when you're actually going to quote somebody very directly. So look at how this might work. Burns and Sinfield make suggestions for students in relation to the space in which they study, recommending discover where you want to study and what learning conditions suit you. What do we notice here? We notice that next to the date, we've got the page reference. So we know that if I looked at that book, page 250 will have the quote on it. And we also know, because of these inverted commas, that this bit of writing here, contained within those inverted commas, that bit is word for word from Burns and Sinfield. And when you use word for word somebody else's writing, you must show very, very clearly that it's their writing and not your writing. And you do that with those inverted commas, and you do that also by putting the page reference. You don't need the page reference again in your final reference section, but you must have it here. Sometimes, of course, you will see people perhaps here, where I'm indicating here just after that inverted comma, perhaps having a bracket saying page 250. And that's okay too. You can decide yourself whether you want to have it here or whether you want to have it here, all right? But the principle is the same. That page reference needs to be there. Now I'm going to say something very briefly about indirect or cited in references. And I'd really suggest that you keep these to a bare minimum. But sometimes you might want to reference in this way. And you probably would want to do that if perhaps you've read something and in the course of reading it, you've come across the ideas for somebody. You haven't actually read that person's work in the original, but you've read what somebody else is saying about their ideas. Certainly when you look at any academic text, you'll see that people are drawing on lots of other people's ideas in the course of their work. But you should keep this to a bare minimum, because what you should be aiming at is reading as many sources for yourself. So if something's going to be really important to you, perhaps go and look at that original source yourself too, particularly those of you that are studying at master's level. There's a few ways you can do this. So by way of example, you could say, if you were looking at Helen Tovey's book on outdoor play, Tovey, brackets, cited in Alban 2011, or perhaps a more sophisticated presentation is the one at the bottom here, where I've written Alban draws on the work of Tovey to assert that. Writing in that way makes it very, very clear to the reader that yes, you're talking about Tovey's idea, but you didn't read Tovey in the original, you read, in this instance, my publication. And so you're looking at my interpretation of Tovey's ideas. If you read Tovey, you may have a different take, of course, and that's why we'd always suggest you do have a look at original sources too. So I've said a little bit now about how you actually reference within the text of your work, be it an essay or a report or whatever. Now I'm going to talk about how you compile an actual reference section. And there's some general points to follow here. Your reference section should include all the material that you've used in the text of your work. You shouldn't have loads of other things in there. Sometimes people have a reference section in the bibliography. We suggest you don't do that because a bibliography is everything that you've read, not everything that you've used in the sort of your work. And when you look at published work, people don't do that. Published work makes sure that all the references that are used in the text are there in the final reference section. So make sure that you kind of do that as well in your work. So every reference, when I'm looking at an essay as a marking tutor, every reference that I see there in the text should have a corresponding reference in full in the final reference section. And when you're compiling your reference section, you need to do it in alphabetical order by the last name of the author. If there's multiple authors, then you're just going by the last name of the first named author of the book or the journal article or whatever it is. That is what is typical in Harvard referencing style. And there should be one overall reference section. I don't expect to see a reference section where I've got books all referenced together and then journal articles all together, then websites all together. They should be integrated in alphabetical order. And there's different types of referencing, and references do look a little bit different according to the type of source that you have used. And probably the easiest is referencing a single authored book. So this book, Donaldson's Children's Minds, you can see the convention is to have the last name of the author, then the initial, the date of publication, the title in full. This is a little title, of course, a short title, but sometimes they're quite long. Then you've got the place of publication, followed by a colon, and then the publisher. And this information, if you're not sure about things like the dates and the place of publication, all that kind of thing, you can find on the very, very first pages of a book. And even in an ebook, you can go into the copyright bit and get that information. Remember, it's the date when it was published, not printed, that you're looking at. Sometimes you'll see it next to a C in a little circle, and that denotes your copywriting. If there's more than one author, as I said before, you just go in name author. So if Burns appeared before Sinfield, that's what you'd expect to see on the front of the book. Now it gets a little bit more complicated when we get on to thinking about edited books, because edited books, such as one I've got here, edited books, as you can see from the cover, mean that you've got a collection of chapters written by different people. On the previous slide, those people had written the entire book. But on this slide, I'm going to go through what you do when the book contains chapters written by lots and lots of different people. And they're the authors of those chapters. It's not like a cited in reference. These people are the authors of their chapter. So what do we do here? So if you have a look at the bottom of this slide here, you'll see that it looks a bit different. It looks a bit more complicated, unfortunately, but when you get used to it, it becomes much, much easier. You'll see that we've got the name of the author's chapter, okay? So the author here is Hilary Fabian. The date of the whole book is the same. So that's still the same principle. But then in inverted commas, you've got the title of the chapter. Then you've got in and the names of all the people who edited the book, eds for short. If there's only one editor, then of course you just say ed. You've got the title of the book that comes next in italics, place and publisher. So in effect, if you're looking at that carefully, you'll see there's a bit of additional information that goes in front of the book. And that is the name of the chapter author and the name of the chapter title. You need to have both. And the reason you need to have both is Cable, Miller and Goodliffe in this instance, they didn't write that entire book. Fabian wrote that chapter. And you imagine if you were Hilary Fabian, you want people to know that you wrote that chapter and you want your work cited properly. And also, that person may not even have the same viewpoint as the editors. Sometimes editors get a group of people together who have diametrically opposed views. So it's really, really important to have the right idea with the right person. Now, journal articles. And journal articles are different again. So if you're referring to a journal article, you'll see that it looks a little bit different at the end. You've got the same information in as much as you've got the author of the journal chapter or the journal article with the initial, with the date of publication. In inverted commas, you've got the full title, however long it might be, of the journal article. Then in italics, you can see the title of the journal. Then you've got information such as volume, the number, and the page range. This is where it's a bit different. Going back to that previous slide on edited books, sometimes in Harvard referencing, you're asked at this point here to put the page range. So sometimes you'll see in brackets just at this point here, after the full title of the book, in brackets you might see page range of that chapter. Okay, and that's not wrong. Many people will reference Harvard in that way, so just be aware of that. So I would say to you, just stick to one particular way of doing it, but the key thing is that you have all this information here. When you're looking at a journal article, you must have the page range and you must have the volume and the number if there is one, because in any given year there might be 3 or 4 volumes. So it's really important that somebody, when they look at your reference section, can actually go and find it easily. If they've got to look and open up all these different volumes, it's annoying. So you need to have that information there. Sometimes people don't write volume or number and page. They might just write 109 brackets 2 colon 140 to 154. It's the same information, it's presented a little bit differently, but it's still Harvard referencing style and it would still be correct. Of course, many of you will be using the internet as a source. Be careful, of course, because not all sources on the internet are very reliable, but it is a good source of things like policy documents, for instance. So this is the Marmot Review, and there's a lot of authors, as you can see in this particular reference. But as you can see, after the reference to the actual policy document, then you've got the actual internet address and the actual date of access. So you need to have that information because websites sometimes change slightly, and so you must make sure you put the date of access. In the text of your essay, you still need to reference a policy document properly, so it'd be Marmot et al. 2010. We still need to have that reference. But sometimes you don't know the actual author, you haven't got a person's name on the internet. So perhaps you've looked at something on the National Children's Bureau website. So it might be that they've got maybe a little bit of information that comes up on their homepage. And you'd have to do something like this. In the text of the essay, you might write National Children's Bureau or NCB 2012, but in your reference section, you'd have to write it like this. You don't know the name of the person, but you know the name of the organisation. But again, I really cannot stress enough, make sure that any websites that you use are reputable. Certainly National Children's Bureau would be one of these. It's a charity and it does a lot of really good work in relation to childhood. So I'm just going to sum up now to finish off this video, the key points that I want you to get from this. Referencing as being a really key bit of your academic writing. And to think about your referencing in 2 ways. There's the referencing that you do in the text of your work, but there's also the final reference section that you compile. And to finish up, I'd really like to say try to get your referencing right, because referencing well will improve your grade. Referencing poorly loses you lots of marks. So really good luck with this. I know it can be difficult to start with, but keep trying. And if you're not sure how to reference something, bring it along to one of your sessions with your tutor and they'll be able to help you.